Okay, the first thing to think about is think of yourself as a character, okay? You want to find a selection of your personality. You don't want everything about your personality in the story, okay? So in some stories, you're emphasizing your competence at a particular field, whether it's golf or marijuana growing or whatever it might be. And then in other stories, you're emphasizing what you don't know. And as I mentioned before, what you don't know is usually more interesting because then readers will identify with you if the question is set up appropriately, and then they'll want to go along for the journey. If you know a lot about a subject, it's always good to emphasize what you don't know and what you're trying to learn, because again, that imitates the kind of journey that the readers are also making. Okay. So, and I'm going to read from an essay called Natural Narratives by Michael Pollan, the author of The Omnivore's Dilemma, about how to use first person strategically. The key is to realize that once you've made the decision that you're writing a first-person piece, you're not done. There's a second decision. Which first person? You have many identities when you're writing. For example, I could approach a piece as a gardener, or a Jew, or a son, or father, as someone who lives in Berkeley, California, as any number of identities. When you're writing in first person, you're not using your whole identity. You're choosing what is useful to the story. With Power Steer, I wrote as a carnivore. I don't know if have you guys read this, or The Omnivore's Dilemma? It's an excellent book. This was an important choice because if I'd written about the meat industry as a vegetarian, nobody would have read what I wrote. I needed to start where my reader was, and odds were that my New York Times reader was a carnivore. It's also much more interesting to find out what happens to a carnivore after he's gone into the heart of darkness of the modern American meat industry than what happens to a vegetarian. Because you know exactly what would happen to a vegetarian. He'd say, "See, I told you so." That's not very interesting. Okay, so that's a good, I think, example of how you choose and how you have a different persona depending on the story that you're telling. So 2, emphasize the universal. What are the aspects of your life that you think that are universal that other people would identify with? And you can, in some stories, emphasize your quirks, but usually it's the connection point is what is universal about this experience of mine that I can share with other people. 3rd, modesty is the best policy. Okay, so excessive bragging about yourself is not a good strategy for this. So it's always good to treat your accomplishments with a little bit of healthy dose of irony, and to emphasize again what you don't know about something. Okay. 4, be engaging. And what really this means is the aspects of first person that you're using, pick and choose amongst them. So the things that really are pertinent, funny, colorful, choose those. And sometimes the more mundane things, you can just leave those out, okay? And this is fine, right? It's you don't have to put everything into it. And I'll just read a little section from Bird by Anne Lamott. She says, I started writing when I was 7 or 8. I was very shy and strange looking, loved reading above everything else, weighed about 40 pounds, and was so tense I walked with my shoulders up to my ears like Richard Nixon. See, that's funny. Yeah. Okay. 5, write as an idiot or at least an amateur, okay? as somebody who doesn't know everything, as somebody who has to ask the questions. Even if you know a lot about a subject, make sure that when you are in an interview and you're kind of getting material for your story, that you emphasize kind of what you don't know, and make sure, like for instance, people think that John McPhee, who's written, just a whole ton of books, they often think that he's dumb or slow when he interviews people. And that's because he goes over things again and again and again and again, so he really understands it. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. What does this really mean, okay? Because later you'll have to explain it. This is really important. Develop as a character in the course of your story or book. Okay, so you start out at one point, you need to get further along, right? You need to change as a result of the experience, okay? If you change, readers will change too. Readers do not like stasis. If you describe a story where you start out at point A and you just you're no different by the end of the story, what's the problem with that?
Well, there's an anticipation of something while you're reading, and probably there's like something wrong or conflict or something that's happening right with the character, and you're anticipating hopefully something good, but something to change.
Yeah.
Anticipation while you're reading, and if it's just like, yeah, you won't read that person again. Nothing manifests based on a different, story arc. Like, I don't know what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say, but there's like a progression or something.
Yeah, that's what we want.
It's pulling you.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just think of the anticipation of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's some kind of payoff. The story should have some kind of payoff at the end of it. And if it doesn't, people will be disappointed. Okay, 7, humor is important, okay? Humor shows that you have some perspective on yourself, okay? Because it takes perspective to ferret out the kind of interesting, funny things. So one of my former students, Judy Gelber, published a piece in Newsweek, and most of the piece was very somber. It was about taking a trip after one of her sons had died of cancer. But in the middle of the piece, she wrote about the boat that she traveled on. She called it an all-female self-styled estrogen boat led by Sandy, our carefree guide with a pierced navel. Among other fascinating bits of girl talk, I learned that nude skydiving can lead to frostbitten nipples. So we did learn something, okay? And the line sort of allowed kind of a levity that really helped people finish reading the piece, which was quite dark. 8, keep the voice consistent, okay? There can be some variation, but, and I see this in a lot of writing where somebody has done some research, and so there's like a big block of research in the middle of a narrative, and you think, wow, this is kind of tough going. Couldn't you integrate that into the story? So that's also something to think about. A lot of times drafts are also inconsistent in their tone, and there's nothing wrong with that, but by the time it's finished, you should pick the tone that really fits. The tone should be appropriate. And this, again, you have to think about what's the subject I'm treating here, and is this really serious approach going to work? Is a lighthearted approach going to work? What's the tone, and does it fit? And then, again, getting back to the developing thing, provide a payoff at the end of your story, okay? What did you learn as a result of the experience? What did the event teach you? And what can you pass along to a reader from that event, okay? And if you do that, and it doesn't seem forced or cliched, people will think, wow, that was interesting, I want to keep reading.